Welcome to Construction Genius. This week's episode is a little different. I'm not the host, I'm the guest. I recently joined the Construction Hall of Fame podcast to talk about one of the most important and often neglected topics in our industry, and that is succession planning. In today's conversation, we cover the blind spots that trip up construction leaders, what great succession planning looks like, and how to keep your top talent from walking out the door. We also talk about how you've got to get started early with your succession planning, long before you're ready to step down. And so if you're thinking about what's next and how to build a company that will last, this conversation is packed with practical insights. Let's dive right in. This is Eric Anderton, and you're listening to Construction Genius, a leadership masterclass. Thomas Edison said that genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. If you're a construction leader, you know all about the perspiration, and this show is all about the 1% inspiration that you can add to your hard work to help you to improve your leadership.
Welcome back to the Construction Hall of Fame podcast. Today we have Eric Anderton joining us as a guest on the show. Thank you for being here, Eric.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me, Matt.
My pleasure. So today we'll be talking about building something that outlasts us as construction leaders, right? This is specifically about succession planning in the construction industry, and more specifically, succession planning that actually works, right? Because there seem to be so many questions, many blind spots that leaders face when they want to plan for and execute a succession strategy. So Eric is here to help demystify part of that process, to talk about some real world examples he's gone through helping construction leaders plan for and execute succession plans, and really just to help leaders focus on that legacy and leadership continuity piece of running a construction company. So Eric, just for starters, would you mind giving us a bit of background about who you are and how you got to where you are today?
Yeah, I have absolutely zero experience working in a construction company. However, I have worked with construction executives since 2004. I began by providing a leadership training program to construction executives in my local area. And then in 2013, I launched my own company and pretty quickly niched down to construction, helping them with executive coaching, succession planning, leadership development, and sales and marketing training.
Why construction?
Because I love people who can drive down the road and point to something and say, I built that. Construction has a profound impact, obviously, on our societies because of the work they do with the lived-in environment, the roads, the buildings, the underground, all that kind of stuff. I just love also the impact it has on a variety of different people in terms of employees, in terms of the communities that they work with and the clients as well. And so I just like the idea of building. And again, I just deeply respect and appreciate the construction industry.
I mean, look around. It's hard to look around and not see something that the construction industry has touched. So
that's right. Yeah, absolutely.
Huge impact this industry brings to the world. So succession planning, right? If you're watching this, go to Eric's website, right? He has a book, he has a podcast, he has a free leadership course, and he also offers coaching, like he just said, for construction leaders.
The leadership course is not free, but it is awesome.
I'm sorry about that, Eric.
No, it's okay. But there are free resources on the website.
There we go. So succession planning, though, it's been a topic that you cover in depth. Essentially, why has that been a focus of yours?
Because there's a deep challenge that many construction leaders have because they spend a lot of, obviously, blood, sweat, tears, time, treasure building a construction company. And the ones that are good at it obviously get rewarded well financially and in terms of the impact that they have upon their customers, their employees, and their communities. But the question that they come to after 20, 30 years in the seat often is, well, what's next? Is this something that I want to continue on? And if I do want to continue it on, how am I going to do that? Am I going to sell the company externally? Am I going to do it internally? If I'm going to do it internally, who is there that can take this over? Is it a family member? Is it a team that I've built over time? There's a number of different discussions that come up. And I think one of the reasons why there's a lot of complexity here is because there's not one right answer. The great thing about business that I love, it can be whatever you want it to be. As long as you're solving problems and adding value in such a way that people will actually want to give you money and you're providing them a service or a product that benefits them, business can be whatever you want it to be. And so there is no one right answer for succession. And because of that, a business owner has to work through a number of different complexities, both emotional, financial, psychological, and logistical, in order to come to a conclusion on what he or she wants to do with their business.
It's an interesting point in the road people come to, right? It's like almost time. It seems like sometimes people haven't even thought about it, right? They haven't thought about what happens next. And if they have, there's just a lack of clarity. What have you found in hindsight are some mistakes or some things people get wrong when they first start thinking about succession planning?
Well, the first one, and I think it's probably obvious to most people, is that they start thinking about succession planning way too late in the game. So, if you're thinking about getting out of the business in the next 2 to 3 years, then you are really behind the 8 ball in terms of succession planning. And the very best construction companies, they don't think of succession planning even necessarily as a means of what they're going to do to pass the business on to the next generation, but they think of it as a dynamic part of their business where they're always looking to develop the talent that they have in their company. They're always thinking about, where is my business going, not only today in terms of a project that we're executing, but 5, 10, 15 years down the road. And so the very best construction companies are starting succession planning almost from the get, almost from when they start the business. And that obviously can be challenging because when you start your business, what are you doing? You're looking to pay the bills. You're looking to make sure your crews are busy. You're looking to land the next project. You're figuring out how to build projects profitably and safely and productively. And so you don't really think of necessarily 10, 15, 20 years down the road. And that's why as soon as possible, you need to be able to step out of the business and work on the business and think about those things, because the more work you put into thinking about the future, the more you can set up the present to point towards that future in a way that benefits you and other people in the business.
And in order for one to be thinking about this from the beginning, they need to have an understanding of what it is, right? And so what does succession really mean to you?
Succession planning can mean a variety of different things, but what it means to me is structuring the business in such a way that it has an ability to provide value for clients and a place of value for employees on an ongoing basis. And so that can be anywhere from a timeline of 5, 10, 15, even 100 years. And I work with companies that have been in business for over 100 years. And so they didn't get there just by happenstance. They get there because they decide that we are the type of company that wants to be around for generations. And they begin with that end in mind and structure the company to move towards achieving that end.
Okay. And for someone who's newer to running a construction business versus someone who's been in business 100 years, the planning aspect can look different.
Yes.
It's almost like you don't know what to plan for because you haven't really gone through it yet. And someone who's 100 years in business, they've seen different cycles, they've seen different markets. I think they have a little more clarity as to what the future could look like and how to plan for that. What do you see as the strategic drivers that do shape the future needs of an organization?
I think those differ for each company, right? Because it differs from a general contractor to a subcontractor. A subcontractor may be more specialized in the type of work they do, whereas a general contractor may be able to take on a variety of different projects in different industry segments. But those are some key questions, right? You want to ask, what are the strategic drivers creating new needs for our organization? Which talents and roles will continue to be important, 1, 3, 5, or even 10 years from now? Which new talents will be critical as the organization evolves? So when you start a construction company, you're probably relatively flat in terms of your organizational structure. But as the company grows, then the organizational structure is going to change. Which new roles do we anticipate needing? Which key people do we anticipate retiring or leaving? These are some of the questions that you have to be asking in order to be able to put together an effective succession plan.
So let's say I'm a commercial general contractor.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I'm thinking about the growth of the organization, how the org structure might look. What are some key points in the growth of a company where you say, okay, we've been flat for a while now. How about at this point in our growth is where we might enter this type of strategic leader? Does that make sense?
Well, yeah, as far as the structure is concerned, let's say I'm starting a commercial construction company. I've been in business 5 years. I'm the president or the CEO, and I have, let's say, 5 to 6 people reporting to me directly. I can handle that probably. When it gets 7, 8, 9, 10, then I may need to think about the structure of the business. Now, remember, it can be whatever you want it to be. So there are some CEOs who have many, many, many people reporting to them, and that's fine. So I'm not trying to give a prescription here, but you have to think about how effective is the company, how productive is the company, how do you feel about the work that you're doing? And if you as a construction company owner are not comfortable, or you're feeling stressed out, or in some way you're not happy with the way your company is structured, then that's when you should look at reorganizing it, or thinking about how does our org chart need to develop as we continue to grow and evolve as a business.
And you did touch on talent development. It seems to me that as a construction organization grows, one bottleneck is that talent development side, right? Because if a leader can effectively oversee, let's say, 5 to 6 direct reports, but then it happens to jump to 10, a leader only has so much time in every day.
Yes.
Right? They can only give so much attention to each person on the team in different aspects of the business. So one thing that I've seen actually impact construction companies is not having the bandwidth as a leader to develop that talent as they grow. The leader gets stretched thin, and all of a sudden, when they were 5 to 6, talent development was strong, it was consistent. But then once the team has grown, it ends up being a bit of a disconnect, right? So it seems like one thing a construction leader might consider, from what you're saying, is evaluating their effectiveness of leadership, evaluating how they develop the team and how that might have changed, and saying, is this sufficient to help my people become excellent? Or would I need someone else in here from a leadership perspective to come in and help with the management of the other direct reports on the team that's grown, to make sure that they're getting that love, they're getting that attention and that mentorship, especially that so many early career construction professionals thrive on, while, of course, more senior professionals do appreciate that level of mentorship as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And again, there's no right answer here. It's something that you have to give some thought to. It's always helpful if you have sounding boards, either internally or externally, that you can bounce ideas off of. But I think one of the challenges that construction companies have is that if you're any good, you're going to attract good help. And then as your business continues to move on, the question that often pops into people's minds is, how can I create opportunity for all of this talent in my organization? And so there's often times where you, and this is a key part of succession planning, you make an intentional decision to grow your business simply because one of the reasons you want to do that is to retain the talent, because you want to give the talent opportunity to grow and to develop in your company. You don't want to lose them to somebody else.
If someone was to ask you, what does that look like? What does giving talent the opportunity to grow, to develop, what does that actually look like in the workplace?
I think on a fundamental level, there's this idea of tours of duty, which I think are tremendously important. And so every company, you have the field and the office, you have estimating, you have project management, you have operations. So there's a variety of different opportunities that people have. And I found that the very best construction companies, and this is typically construction companies that are a little larger, and so they have some overhead room where they can do these kinds of things. They'll, for instance, take a project engineer and they'll pair them up with a project manager for a couple of seasons, and then move them into pairing them up with a superintendent, and perhaps even move them into estimating. And by doing that, they're giving these project engineers a well-rounded picture of the business and a feel for the business that perhaps they wouldn't get if they were just stuck in one of those silos. And as you're doing that, you're doing a couple of things. Number one, you're being able to evaluate the talent that you have in terms of how they respond. And number two, you're giving them an opportunity to see what they actually really like to do. And then the third thing is, if I'm a project engineer and I've worked with a project manager and then I've worked with a superintendent, I have a deeper understanding of some of the challenges that occur between the field and the office. And as a result of that, may be able to bridge those gaps more effectively as I grow in my career and step into leadership roles. So that idea of tours of duty can be tremendously helpful.
The other day, I was speaking with them. They're a high-end residential architecture firm, and they said something that was very interesting to me, something that I hadn't heard before, but it kind of condenses what you just said. When they would onboard a new employee, what they would do is they would have that new employee for the first 10 weeks. They would assign them 10 different mentors, people in different areas of the business. Maybe one's client facing, maybe one's more technical, right? The different facets of the architectural firm, of how they work. They would get this new employee exposure to 10 different elements of the business through different lenses as a way of sort of getting them entrenched, getting their feet wet, helping them understand how they work. I think this could be a huge way for companies to successfully develop people in the short term, but also help them understand, if their earlier career, maybe what are some things they like more, maybe what are some things they don't like as much. But it seemed like that was kind of a condensed version of what you're talking about.
Yeah, it's interesting. The only thought that popped into my mind is a week long enough to give someone enough of a taste, and perhaps in certain companies it is. But I can see how that would be a great opportunity just to kind of test stuff out, see what works, see what doesn't, see what people are interested in.
To your point, it's like giving them a taste.
Yeah.
Right? It's really not enough to get immersed or do any deep learning, but a week can maybe give someone a taste.
Yep. And I think one of the things about succession planning that is really important is addressing flight risks. So who are the key employees that might be considering leaving? And then how can you keep them? And this goes back to my earlier comment on strategically growing in order to keep them. But you do not want to assume that someone wants to work for you for the next 20 or 30 years. And you must absolutely be aware that if you've got someone who's talented in any way, they're being hit up all the time by recruiters, by your competitors. And so you have to put a strategy in place to address that. And so you have to ask, who is this person? Why might they be leaving? What really motivates them? How can we keep them motivated and engaged? And you have to go through that process, because if you don't, I promise you that people are going to swoop in and take away talent, and it's really going to hurt your business.
How do you help leaders analyze who might be a flight risk?
I think you have to, again, I'm just going to assume that anyone who is talented is a flight risk because another company can come in and give them an offer that they can't refuse. So even if someone has articulated to me their commitment and they're great people, I know that this is at will employment. And what that means, obviously, is we don't have contracts here. And so if they choose to opt out and go with my competition down the road, then that's something that they can do. And so what I want to make sure is that I'm giving people that opportunity to grow and to develop. I'm not ignoring issues that are coming up. That doesn't mean I cater to everyone in my organization. If someone has a problem, I do whatever I can to fix it, because it may not be a legitimate concern. But I'm always aware of where they are now, where they want to be in their future. What is their aspiration? And this is tremendously important with succession planning, is creating clear career paths for people where you can sit down with them and say, today you're here. 3 years from now, you could be here if A, B, and C happen. So you're being as clear as you can with them about that. And you're also accepting the fact that sometimes you may have two very talented people and you're forced to choose between one of them in terms of the next promotion. And as a result of that, you may actually lose that talented person. And you should be thinking about, okay, so if I make that decision to promote someone into a new role and someone else has not taken that promotion and I still want them in the organization, what do I need to do to maximize the possibility of me retaining them even if they don't get that promotion? Think about the last time you promoted someone into a leadership role and it failed. Why did it fail? I can tell you one reason. People know how to build projects, but they don't know how to build and lead teams of people. Construction comes with its challenges that only insiders truly understand. Generic leadership training doesn't cut it. You need a program to train your leaders built specifically for construction professionals led by an industry expert. And my online course, The Shift, is exactly that course. It has 5 modules. It'll teach your people how to control their calendars and reduce stress and embrace chaos and accomplish their critical tasks. It will teach them the 3 essential messages they have to communicate every day in order to motivate and lead their team effectively. It'll show them how to build and lead a high-performing team, give them a framework for running effective meetings so they'll be able to solve problems in less than an hour, and also give them a higher perspective on their leadership that will enable them to work on the business and on their teams and not get stuck in the weeds micromanaging. So go out to my website, theshift.constructiongenius.com, read all about the course, and then enroll yourself and your leaders in the course, and I guarantee that it will transform your leadership. If it does not, you take the whole course and you didn't get benefit from it, you just send me an email, eric@constructiongenius.com, and I will cheerfully refund you 100% of your money. I'm really confident this course will transform your leadership. So again, go out to the website, theshift.constructiongenius.com, learn more about the course, and start taking it today.
Your point about communicating with clarity in a situation like this is so important, right? Like I sit on the recruitment side of this desk, right? So I'm speaking with candidates constantly about what motivates them, what would drive them to make a move. So often it's lack of clarity around career development, around career path. It's like that piece of the puzzle is skipped over by construction leaders. They just neglect to talk about it. From my perspective, it seems like sometimes it's just because they might not be confident about what they would be able to present to them, or they haven't thought enough about that So they just kind of put it on the back burner as a means of just hoping things continue to go well.
Yep.
But unfortunately, many people think about their career intentionally. So if they're not being clearly communicated to about how they can grow, and someone else can do that, and they do that even in an interview process, they're looking at the grass on the other side and they're saying, well, at least they say the grass can be greener. At least there was a path communicated about how the grass can be greener, when I'm getting nothing at my current farm.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely true. And so you do have to give a lot of thought to it. And again, it's normal, right? I hire someone to do a job that I'm going to pay them money for to do today. And I want them to solve a problem and add value today in this particular role. And it's natural not necessarily to think of 3 to 5 years down the road. And so as a leader, you have a tricky balance to strike between execution today and then development for tomorrow, but it's a balance that you absolutely have to strike if, again, you want to develop a long-term company that's going to succeed over multiple decades and multiple generations.
So let's just take it back a second. So how do you help owners look 3, 5, 10 years out into the future, but doing it with clarity?
Yeah, it's really, first you have to be able to carve out the time to do it, right? And so I think the most effective way to do that is to get together with yourself. The president of the company gets together with his or her key leaders. And when it comes to succession planning, my recommendation is you get out of the office, you can rent a hotel room, you can go to an event center or something like that. And you just begin to ask some questions, some key questions. What does succession planning mean to us? What would be the great outcome of a succession plan? What is the timing to create the plan? What's the timing for the execution of the plan? What's driving the need for a succession plan? Who should be involved in the process, right? What are the key roles that need a succession plan? What is the timing for succession for each role? And so you've got to ask these types of questions, and they're rather broad. And the reason they're rather broad is because the answer for each company can be different. And that's like what we said, your business can be whatever you want it to be. But the best way to start with succession planning is to begin very broad and to ask a series of good questions that you can then begin to discuss together. And through that discussion, get to more specificity, more clarity, and then through specificity and clarity, get to action.
So on the side of specificity, I find that oftentimes when it comes to org charts, construction companies might not really have an org chart mapped out. It's kind of known but not stated, known but not documented.
Right.
People understand what their role is in the company, but there's not a photo on the wall or a diagram on the wall showing, here's our org chart. How important do you think the org chart, the KPIs, role clarity, how important is that when it comes to succession planning?
Well, I think the third one, you mentioned the role clarity is absolutely essential. I'm not sure how important actually having an org chart on a wall is. Obviously, you want to have some sort of understanding of the structure of the company. But in terms of importance, clarity on role and responsibility is absolutely essential. And then tying KPIs to those roles and responsibilities is absolutely essential so that I can know whether or not they're being executed well. In terms of the org chart, the benefit of having an org chart is just so that people understand who's in charge of bidding, who's in charge of planning, who's in charge of building, who's in charge of getting paid, and how are those roles then going to be reporting up the structure and how are they affecting down the structure as well. But I think one of the ways that construction companies often fall short is a lack of clarity around roles and responsibilities. And as a result of that, there's a lot of finger pointing and there's a lot of micromanagement that then takes place. And you have people who spend a lot of time doing other people's jobs because that lack of clarity exists around whose roles and responsibilities, what the roles and responsibilities are, and who should be doing what.
And it seems that role clarity and KPIs can often tie back into the org chart, right? Because if someone has an understanding of the org chart as a whole, and they can say, okay, in my role, if success is defined on this and my KPIs are this, if I was to hit my KPIs, well, there may be an opportunity to move upward in the org chart.
Yes.
So I agree to your point. It's like having it on the wall, maybe that's not the most important thing, but having people understand how the success of their position ties back to growth within an organization could be a great way to give employees confidence about the future.
Yeah, so that's a good point in terms of creating the career paths and tying that in with the org chart. So you can present the org chart and say, here you are today, here's where you could be relative to the org chart. This is your role and responsibility and the KPIs associated with your current role. And if you execute on those, this is the path that you could go on in order to get to where you want to go. I think another thing to keep in mind as well is that there are many good people in construction companies who are not ambitious. And let me tell you what I mean by that. There may be someone who's a project manager and they're excellent at what they do. And we may assume that they have ambitions to be a project executive or an operating officer, but they may not. They may just want to build the work and they're quite content on that. And so just like your business is whatever you want it to be, people's careers are whatever they want them to be, as long as they're adding value and solving problems and justifying their paycheck. And so it's important that you have those discussions and identify the people who do have the ambitions to move up or the people who are just quite content in the roles that they're in.
Right. It's almost like self-awareness as an employee is so important to understand, where do I want to go?
Yeah.
This organization support where I want to go. And on the flip side, if every single employee in your company, let's say you have 15 project managers, they're all exceptionally ambitious. Well, there's only so many who can rise to the next level and the next level. So having a team that might have spread out ambitions and understanding those seems to be a way to help retain those people. But I think going back, your piece about communicating with clarity, obviously very important. Now, what I'm curious to dive into with you is cadences from a communication perspective as a construction leader, right?
Yep.
There's quarterly performance meetings, yearly performance meetings. How often do you suggest, when you're speaking about a career path, when you're evaluating talent, communicating with them, what cadences have you seen keep leaders most in touch with their team?
I think that when you're having your quarterly check-ins, and I mean, I know in talking about check-ins and quarterly meetings and annual meetings, many people listening to this may be saying, yeah, I know that's what I'm supposed to do, but I don't do it. What I would be saying is that on an annual basis, you definitely want to be revisiting the career path. And on a quarterly basis, you want to be checking in on those KPIs that are related to the progression along the career path, so that people are not, you don't want people to be blindsided every year by bad news, you could say. You want people to know, they need to know on a semi-regular basis where they stand in your organization. And that quarterly basis it's a good check-in point, right? Because I'm not going to talk about it every week, because right now, this week, we need to execute this project and get it done. I'm not even going to talk about it every month necessarily, because 12 times a year talking about your career, it's not necessary. But every quarter, just checking in and saying, hey, listen, I know we set these goals for the year. Here you are on your goal progression. Keep in mind how the execution of your goals relates to your career path, and let's make sure we're moving forward here. So I think a quarterly/annual cadence in terms of tying performance into career paths in one form or another is appropriate.
And not overlooking those conversations and being specific when possible is so important. I can't tell you the amount of times I've spoke to someone who said, yeah, I talked with leadership about potential promotions, potential step up within the company. We've talked about it a few times, but I don't really have much clarity. Right?
Yeah.
They talked about it, but they didn't really talk about much. Right. So the employee walks away feeling maybe worse than they would if they were just given the truth about the situation, so they could at least have clarity for their career.
Yeah. And it's a tough one again, right? Because we don't want to overpromise with people, but at the same time, we don't want to cloud issues and give no clarity so that people don't know where they stand. And so for every leader, there is a judgment call that has to be made. And that's the essence of leadership, is judgment. And being able to understand situations and make the right calls based on the situations. And the more transparent you can be with people, I think that the better, the more people appreciate that. But again, you have to balance that with the needs of the business. I may not necessarily want to say to a project manager that they don't have the opportunity for the next promotion because someone else is going to get that promotion. I may not want to necessarily articulate that completely, because I may lose them as a result of that. But at the same time, I do owe them a degree of clarity and transparency. And I don't think there's necessarily one answer to that question.
This is going to be a situational question, but let's say we are, as a construction leader, you find yourself in that position. Someone's going to get the promotion. Someone else is going to be passed up for it.
Yep.
You know they wanted the promotion. What have you seen work to help keep someone like that on your team if they're a strong player?
Yes.
Or has it typically just led to them being a flight risk?
Okay, so I think one of the things that you can do is make sure that that strong player is on a project that he or she wants to be involved in. Okay, so let's say it's a project manager who didn't get the project executive promotion. I don't want to then stick them on a sucky project that they hate. I want to make sure that they're doing work that they enjoy. I want them to know that I appreciate their contribution. And they didn't get the promotion not because they're a bad person, but we thought that the other person would be a better fit for this particular role. If this person, for instance, is technically very strong, but in a leadership way, not very strong, and therefore didn't get the promotion to perhaps moving from project builder to people leader, then I want to be transparent with them about that and let them know that and give them a possible path for improving on that. But I also want to emphasize with them, if it's appropriate, that listen, you're technically tremendously skilled and we need you here at this organization and we value you as far as that's concerned. If you can tie that value to both recognition and also rewards, then that can be something that's tremendously powerful as well in communicating to them your appreciation. The last thing I would say is that if you want to keep someone who is technically sound but didn't get that promotion, you want to make sure that the person that they're reporting to is someone that they respect and someone that they enjoy working for, because people don't always quit their companies, they quit their bosses. And so that's something else to think about too. And it's kind of tricky, right? Because perhaps the person who you've promoted is now the person who didn't get the promotion's boss. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't do that, because you know what you need to do with your company. But if that's the case, then you probably want to get with the person who got promoted and really communicate strongly to them that the person who didn't get promoted is a valuable team member, and that the newly promoted leader needs to make sure that they're communicating that very clearly as well. It shouldn't be a situation where they're like, yeah, I got the promotion and you didn't, you loser. It should not be that in any way at all.
And on the flip side, as an employee, this reminds me back when I played baseball in school, and one of my coaches would say, don't get bitter, get better.
Yes.
I mean, it's a situation where we can only control what we can control. As an employee, if you're aspirational, if you're ambitious and you want to grow into that position, you just got turned down for the position, let's say for it's the reason you listed, right? The leadership skills aren't as strong as your technical skills, which is why someone else we deem to be a better fit. What can you do as an employee to get better, right? And I'm not sure, is this something you work with, Eric? If a construction professional wanted to improve their leadership skills, could they come to you and say, hey, Eric, I'd like to work with you on my leadership skills? Or do you mostly work with executives?
I work with anyone from the president and the CEO of a company all the way down to senior project managers and project managers and superintendents. And the answer to that is yes. I mean, you can then decide a development path that you want to work on. And I like that idea of don't get bitter, get better. But I think also that you do need to evaluate yourself a little bit and ask yourself, do I really want that leadership role? Is it something I want because other people want it for me, or because I think I should have that role because that's the career path? You know how we map out these career paths in our head? Or do I need to look in the mirror and say, you know what, I am that technical expert and I really do thrive in this one particular area and I do provide a tremendous amount of value. I'm a craftsperson when it comes to this aspect of construction. And perhaps I can just embrace that reality and not have to be something that I think I should be, and really just embrace who I am genuinely myself and be content with that, because I can then make a tremendous contribution in that area and still get paid very well and still find a lot of fulfillment.
Find that zone of genius.
Yeah, no, there's a lot to that, right? And again, it depends on who you are. Every person is different. Every person has a different career path. It doesn't have to be one particular way. But the more honest you are with yourself, the more open you are, the more willing you are to change and to develop, and then also to accept where your strengths are and perhaps where your weaknesses are as well. That can help you to position yourself to make the greatest possible contribution in the company that you're involved in.
All right, quick break to talk about my book, Construction Genius. This is what I want you to do. Go to Amazon, search for the book, read all of the 5-star reviews, because there's a ton of them. Over 50 to be precise. And the reason I want you to read them is because real people wrote those reviews who've actually read the book. And it'll give you an idea of why you should go and buy a copy right now on Amazon. And here's the deal. If you purchase 10 or more copies for your company, and then send me an email, eric@constructiongenius.com. I'll come in via Zoom and do a 1-hour Q&A and a bonus training session with your team at no charge. I normally charge $4,500 for an hour of my time. And again, for you, I'll do it at no charge if you buy 10 or more copies of my book. And the reason you should buy it is all in the title. It's effective, hands-on, practical, simple, no BS, leadership, strategy, sales, and marketing advice for construction companies. So if you're in the construction industry, this book is for you. So you can get it on Amazon. You can also get it on Audible in the audio version as well, narrated by yours truly. And I know you'll really enjoy it. So go out and get the book. And now back to the interview.
So when it comes to what we've been discussing in depth, actually, right, it's like the tools of a succession plan. You've dove into a couple important topics. One that we haven't touched on as much that I'd like to get your take on is the idea of systemizing, creating SOP, processes, right? I've seen entrepreneurs implement the EOS system, right, prior to a succession plan, entrepreneurial operating system. Talk to me a little bit about process maps that can help ensure that the successors inherit systems and, frankly, not just chaos.
It's interesting, right? Because I think this is one of the underappreciated aspects of succession planning. The problem that tremendously successful people have is that their success often is dependent upon things that they're unconscious about. They do things unconsciously or by habit as a result of what they've learned, and it leads them to a lot of success. The challenge with that is because it's unconscious, it's not documented, it's not laid out in a way that other people can tap into that success and learn themselves what the other person is doing. And so that's where process mapping is so important when it comes to succession planning. And so you have to be able to name the process, you have to develop metrics for success for the process, what can go wrong in each step, how we monitor and measure each step of the process, ideas to improve the process, the person responsible for each step along the way in a process. But you've got to get out of your head the stuff that you do unconsciously and get it onto paper. And the quicker that you can do that, the more successful you can be in communicating what it is that makes you unique in your business and helping other people to begin to do that unique thing as well. And they may not always do it as well as you do just because there's a special sauce that you have that's based on your individuality. But if they can do it at an 80, 90% level of what you do, because they understand the process, because you've taken time to articulate the process, then it can help other people to be much more successful.
When you think about to leaders you've worked with who have been most successful at creating processes, SOPs, what did they have in common with how they approached creating the processes and how they delivered the processes to their team?
I think the most successful people, what they do is they sort of team the process mapping. And what I mean by that is, so let's say I'm very good at executing a particular part of the project. So let me give you an example. Like if I'm very good at selling projects, I should have someone in my organization interview me as to the things that I do along the way. And so in that interview process, you can start with, what is it that you do in this situation when you're going into an interview to talk to a prospective client about a project that they're building? How do you prepare for that? What questions do you ask? Why do you ask those questions? When do you ask those questions? And as you're being interviewed by someone, you can then begin to articulate that step-by-step process that you use that you may not even be conscious of. So getting into that questioning environment can really help to articulate what it is that you're doing. And then once that articulation has occurred, you then have to order it in a way that people can follow so they can understand, here's step one, here's step two, here's step three. Obviously, in many cases, you have to allow for intuition and the fact that not every process is step one, step two, step three, but there could be step one, step 2A, or step 2B, depending on what happens. And so you have to map out those complexities as well. But the interview style of laying out a process can be very helpful because a person can ask a question. Based on the answer, they may pick up on some subtlety or nuance that the person answering the question may not be aware of, ask another question based on that, and begin to lay out what actually is happening in an organization that causes it to be successful.
And I've seen it happen a lot where a leader will create a process and then for some reason the process isn't always followed.
Yes.
Or it's not top of mind, it's not talked about enough. What do you see as the best way to get consistent buy-in and execution of a process? Is it having a company handbook with the processes laid out? Is it, for example, a Google Doc with every SOP listed out that you could possibly have in the company? What have you seen work best for accountability to the process?
Yeah, I think obviously documentation is key. And then sitting down with someone and communicating the process. So a very simple way of doing it is this. Here, let me show you how to do this. Then let me watch you do it. And then you do it by yourself and let's look at the result. But documentation is key. Clear communication is key. And then accountability and follow-up. And typically when someone is taking over a new process or doing something they haven't done before, your cadence of accountability and follow-up is going to be more frequent than someone who is already familiar with a particular process and executing that process. So documentation, clear communication, and then accountability. That's how you lock in people using processes effectively.
Love that. So when it comes to replacing the CEO,
yes,
right? Replacing the person at the number one seat in the company, doesn't need to be stated how important that hire or that replacement would be. Do you find more often it's someone inside of the company who ends up taking that position or someone who you recruit externally?
I think it really depends. I think one thing to keep in mind, though, for a lot of construction companies is that the first generation CEO is often multi-talented. So, for instance, they're very good at winning work, and they're also very good at planning and building the work, and they don't mind chasing the money. With the second generation, you may not always find one person who is good at all of those things. And so in the second generation, often the three main areas of bidding work, building work, and getting paid get split up between co-owners. But having said that, there should always be someone who is then taking the executive lead as well. In other words, having final decisions, they're not just operational in terms of bidding, building, or getting paid, but they're also making final decisions that relate to each one of those areas. And when you're replacing the CEO, you have to have someone who is not only technically capable, but you also have to have someone who has the leadership chops and the willingness to be the person who takes the hits and makes the decisions and takes the responsibility. And so that's one of the tremendous challenges. To answer your question, whether it's internal or external, I think the answer is it depends. If you don't have anyone internally who can do that, then obviously you have to go externally. But ideally, over time, you're developing that next generation. And again, you may find that though you're very capable at many different things in a company, the next generation, you may not have that same talent level in one person, but it can be distributed through more than one person. And that then can affect the way that you structure the transition of the ownership in terms of ownership portions and things like that for the second generation.
Point earlier about having a sounding board.
Yeah.
So important here. I don't know if it has to be either or, it could be both. Having a strong sounding board and also a high level of self-awareness to understand what makes me special, what makes me great at what I do.
Yes.
Having someone else to also shed some light on that. It seems like that's really the first step, right? Is analyze like what makes me me,
Yep.
What has got us to where we are today from a leadership perspective, and then reverse engineering. Okay, does someone else on our team possess those same skills? Could someone externally possess those same skills if they're not internal? Or do we have to piecemeal this into several different positions to where each person is owning a certain zone of genius where maybe I had two or three, maybe we need to partition that out to whoever ends up filling this role.
Yeah, it's entirely appropriate to do that. And again, each company is different. That's one of the things about succession planning. It's a very broad topic, and that then lends itself to being worked out in unique ways in each different organization.
In the planning of a succession plan, in the planning phase, it seems that the leader of the company having some sort of training, mentoring process would be critical, right? I mean, we want to have all the knowledge and the wisdom and the experience of this leader passed on. We see it all the time, right? In construction, the superintendents who are getting older in their career and they possess all this knowledge. It's like, what are we going to do when all these supers retire? And then the younger generations might not have that wisdom captured and passed down to them. Have you seen it work successfully to where maybe a few years before one would plan on exiting the business in some way, shape, or form, they take someone on their team into the trenches on sales meetings in just different aspects of the company to really get their feet wet and train them? Or what have you seen help in terms of passing down that wisdom other than, creating systems and processes, which certainly should capture some of that?
Yeah. So again, I think that systems and processes do capture some of it, but then you have to get the buy-in of the people, right? So hopefully you have your superintendent who's been with you for 10, 15, 20 years. Hopefully that person is willing to bring someone up and is not threatened by the next generation. That's not always the case, but those are the types of people that you're looking for. Again, if you're looking to develop a succession plan over the years, one of the wise things to do is to get people around you that might be leaving at the same time that you are, in the sense of retiring out of the business. And they would then have incentives to develop the next generation so that the business can be passed on. But that idea of mentorship is absolutely essential. And it's not something that's guaranteed, though, because people tend to be protective of their turf. And so that then goes back to this idea of hiring the right people for the right positions in your organization. So if you do determine that I want my company to go beyond myself to the next generation and perhaps even generations after that, then the types of people that you hire into your organization are going to have an impact on that. So if you hire people who are not willing to mentor the next generation, who are insecure in their roles in terms of, oh, I don't want to train anyone who might take over from me. Those are probably not the types of people that you want to hire.
Okay, so if I'm a construction leader, a business owner, and I'm starting to think about succession planning as something that I do want to do, but I'm feeling a little bit overwhelmed, where do you suggest I start?
One thing you can do if you like is you can go out to my website. I have a template on the website. What I would encourage you to do is just to download the template and begin to work through it. If that's the only thing you do, you'd get a tremendous amount of value from that. And I can give you a link so that people can go and in the show notes and get the template. But I would begin by working through that. And the first thing I would do is I would go offsite with my key leaders and I would start just a general inquiry into what succession planning means for us and some of the questions that I shared earlier. And those are all in my succession planning document. And you can begin to work through some of the high level ideas. There is an advantage to bringing in an outside facilitator many times, simply because as the president and CEO, you don't have to facilitate the meeting and think about the answers at the same time. It kind of frees you up. But in the initial stages, I wouldn't necessarily recommend that you bring someone in. I think you should just begin to work through it yourself and start asking those high level questions with people that you trust internally in the business and get a sense of where perhaps this succession could go. Obviously, as you get into more detail, as you get closer to the time when you might want to pass the company on, bringing in outside advisors from a structuring of the deal perspective, legal advice, all those kinds of things, that's tremendously important. And then using someone like me who's facilitated many discussions around succession can be tremendously useful as well.
What are your thoughts on how ESOPs fit into this versus maybe having someone take over? Or I've also seen construction leaders decide, hey, let's just become employee owned as a company before I phase out. What have you seen in regard to ESOPs, or maybe not going with the employee ownership route and just having someone take over as the new leader?
I'm agnostic as to the vehicle that people use. I have companies that are clients who are ESOP. I have clients that looked at ESOP and decided it's not for us. The ESOP model can work very well if you're committed to it and able to communicate the value of it clearly to the next generation. It has its drawbacks, but any vehicle for selling a company has its drawbacks and its benefits. So I'm not really an advocate for any one. Again, it's whatever you want it to be, but you should explore your different options and decide on how to structure it based on what's best for your business.
Okay, so as we wind down, I'd love to give the audience a picture of what great looks like when executing a succession plan.
Yeah.
Can you maybe tell a story about one of your most successful succession plans you've been a part of?
Yeah, so I was working with one of my clients and he took a lot of time to develop his succession plan and to explore different opportunities in terms of different ways of passing the business on. And then he took a lot of time identifying those three key legs of the stool, right? Where the get work, the build work, and the get paid. And then he made a decision, which I think was quite important when it comes to succession planning. He decided that it was more important for him to be able to pass the company on in the way that he wanted to, instead of trying to maximize his financial return. And that's something that every person has to wrestle with, right? I call it the how much is enough question. So again, you've built your business, blood, sweat, and tears. Hopefully you've been successful enough to have a lifestyle that suits you. Then you've got to ask yourself, how much more money do I need in order to be satisfied? And how then does that affect the way that I structure the deal? And because this gentleman understood that if he wanted to pass it on in the way that he wanted to, it would lower the amount of money he could make. He was willing for that, though, because what was more important to him was taking care of the employees who had been loyal to him through passing the business on to them, and also the legacy of his business from one generation to the next. Now, let me say this. If your goal is to maximize your financial return, that's perfectly acceptable. It can be whatever you want it to be. What's most important, though, is that you're clear on what you want it to be, and then understand that there's pros and cons to every approach, and take advantage of the pros, accept the cons, and then make decisions that enable you to pass the business on in a way that is right for you and right for the people who are taking the business over from you.
Love that. Clarity going in seems to be something that's so important. Knowing what you want makes it a lot easier to plan for what you want and execute what you want. And it seems that for someone watching this, if you're lacking the clarity, if you're lacking maybe even understanding what you want in the first place out of a succession, would probably be a great opportunity for you to reach out to Eric and do a little bit of strategic planning in that aspect.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And we can book in a quick 10-minute call and we can figure out very quickly for how I can help you. And if I can't help you, I'll let you know right away. And if I can, then we can take more time to explore how.
So a couple final questions we've got here. One is, I've found that executing a succession plan in a family-run company can get a little bit hairy when it comes to comparing that to a company that's not family-run.
Yep.
Do you approach family-run company succession planning differently than you would with a company that's not family-run?
I'm not sure I approach it differently. It really depends on the family, right? So in my opinion, the very best companies who want to pass on their business to the next generation make sure that the next generation actually does not start their career in the business. Obviously, when you're a teenager or something, you might be sweeping floors during the summer. But let's say you go to school, you get your construction management degree, go work for someone else for 5 to 10 years. Go earn it a little bit somewhere else where you're not the prince, right? Or the princess. And make sure that you enjoy the industry and it's something that you're committed to and that you learn something. So number one, you have more credibility when you come back into the company. And number two, you actually may have some ideas that may benefit the company as a result of what you've learned and help the company to grow in the next generations that are to come. I think one of the words of advice that I would give to every family company is take your dad goggles off. And I think of that many times in terms of sports where, the parents think that their child is a much better player than they actually are. And that's one of the benefits of sending them out into the world to work for another company, because they can then see whether or not they're as good as you think they are. And so take your dad goggles off and make sure that you're not giving your child too much responsibility and too much credit that they haven't yet earned. Make them earn it. At the same time, don't be overly critical of them. Hold them to high expectations and high standards, but understand that they do bear the weight of your last name. And with great power comes great responsibility, right? And so you got to understand that there's a challenge there. And the third thing I would say is that any leader worth their salt is going to have their own ideas and opinions. And as a parent, if you're going to be passing the business on to your child, you have to begin to navigate the switch from parent-child to peer relationship and be able to take feedback and ideas from your child and think about how you're going to use those for the future direction of your business. In other words, don't just say, you're a kid, I know everything and you don't. You've got to think through the input that you're getting from them and how they can be of benefit to the organization.
The piece you said about earning it.
Yes.
So important. We've both witnessed companies, I'm sure you have,
Yep.
I've witnessed companies crumble as a result of a succession plan where a family member was brought in. They were only brought in because they had the same last name.
Yep.
They hadn't really earned much of the respect of their team or really contributed as much as you would expect someone taking over this type of leadership position to have contributed. They step in, everyone's disgruntled. They're saying, the son or daughter of the president just took over the company. They don't know what they're doing. They haven't been doing anything for years. And all of a sudden they're just running the company, which can really disgruntle teams. Versus on the flip side, if someone has earned that and they have the respect of their peers, it can go so well.
Yes.
So that's such an important piece you touched on.
Yep. Absolutely. Yep.
And as that parent in that position, it goes back to reverse engineering from my perspective. How can we equip them to earn that respect? How can we force them to earn the respect by not handing them everything in the business,
Yep.
but putting them through challenges and having them prove themselves and actually be in a competence level to take over that position because they weren't just handed everything,
Yep.
but they were actually challenged and brought value. And this is such an important piece of the puzzle, I think, as a parent, to not just hand them something, right? To make sure they're in a position to earn, because to your point, with great power comes great responsibility.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you 100%.
So to take things away, I think one question in the back of many people's mind who are listening to this show is, okay, so I'm going to execute a succession plan. I have X, Y, or Z person lined up as someone who could be a potential option. How do I know when they're ready to step up?
You can only test it. One thing I can say, just please, if you have one person, you got to go in with your eyes wide open and don't impose your plans for them on them. Make sure that what you want for them is what they actually want. And the reason why you should get started with succession planning early is because your succession plan is not going to survive contact with the real world. So what I mean by that is that you're going to say, this person is going to be my successor. And that person may not want it, or they may leave the company. Stuff like that happens all the time. And that's why you have to get started earlier, as early as possible, so that you can go through those iterations of trial and error that are associated with any plan. And you're well aware of that because you build construction projects all the time, and a plan is something that changes on a constant basis. And so you really do have to keep that in mind as you're putting together the succession plan.
Right. Well, Eric, it has been a value-packed episode. I appreciate you joining me on the show today.
Yeah, my pleasure, Matt.
Yep. So for someone who wants to get in touch with you, Eric,
Yep.
You have your book, Construction Genius. You have the Construction Genius podcast. You have the not free course that you can purchase on your site. Where do you suggest people find you to best get in touch with you?
Yeah, constructiongenius.com. There's a number of free resources there. And like you said, Matt, I appreciate you mentioning it. I have a book on Amazon. You can get it for $20. There's over 50 5-star reviews for the book. Tell me they really like it. Over 300 podcast episodes, many of them related to succession planning, by the way. And again, just go to constructiongenius.com and you can begin your journey there. And if you do want to book a call with me to discuss any of the things that we've talked about, you can just click on the button there and book in 10 minutes with me. I'm happy to have a quick chat with you.
And I do highly recommend that a construction leader listening to the show does check out Eric's book. I've bought his book. I've read his book. It was fantastic. So for someone who's concerned with pedigree of leadership, growing as a leader, really, whether you're a project executive or you're a leader of a construction company, the book is packed with value and real world value, not just fluff. This is a great piece Eric's put together. Highly suggest you check that out. And again, Eric, thanks so much for joining me.
My pleasure, Matt. It's been a tremendous pleasure, and thank you for having me on. Hey, thank you for listening to today's episode. If you need some help at all in any way with your succession planning, go to my website, constructiongenius.com. And you can find a little button there to book a call with me. And let's spend 10 minutes together chatting about if or how I can help you with your succession planning. It's something that I specialize in, and I work exclusively with construction companies. So thanks for listening to today's episode. Please give the show a rating and a review wherever you get your podcasts, and also share the episode with other people who would benefit from listening to it. I'll catch you on the next one. Thank you for listening to this episode of Construction Genius. Hope you found that 1% of inspiration to help you in the next few days. If you like the show, please give us a 5-star review on iTunes, share it with other construction leaders who you think would benefit, and always remember that the show is brought to you by Kick-Ass Meetings. I've been working with construction leaders since 2004, teaching them how to run extremely effective problem-solving meetings that gets their people collaborating, taps into their creativity. And to get yourself a free copy of the Kick-Ass Meeting Report, go to www.ericanderton.com/kickassmeetings. Grab yourself that free report, read it, use it in your business. You'll find it extremely useful. And thanks again for listening.